All right, thanks for coming down and making time for today's next lecture series that we have. So there's been a lot of questions that's going around the gym on how we plan our training program, and also some of you may have some questions with regards to nutrition, or even find it challenging to take that next step. So you're just hitting a roadblock, or just want to know what are some strategies that can make your nutrition journey better and more effective. So we wanted to take the opportunity today to really address those concerns and just give you a better idea of things. So today's focus will be on the thought process of the higher performance training system. So I'm gonna start off with basically some of the concerns or some of the challenges that some of you are facing. So the reality of some diets. So assuming your coach gives you a calorie deficit of 1,800, most of you will be able to sustain that, let's say from Monday to Saturday. Then probably on the Sunday, you just feel like you have to give in. Maybe it might be some social obligation where you're having dinner with the family, with friends, and you just can't say no due to whatsoever reason. So with that, let's say if you were to take a calculation of 1,800 times 7, for you to be in a deficit and for you to actually lose weight, that will equate to 12,600 calories. But because on your Sunday, in this case, you have 700 calories above your deficit. So then that gives you a net total of 13,300 calories. And with that, you exceed your overall calorie intake and you are above your deficit. And therefore, when you're not in a deficit, you will not lose weight basically. So this is the reality of some people's diet, right? So then there is something that can be your saving grace. This term is called calorie cycling, basically assigning different calories on each day of the week. So basically some benefits for this, it gives you a break from, eating possibly the same things every day. And you just, also at the same time, it gives you some flexibility. So in that scenario earlier where on Sunday you have like some social gatherings with friends, or let's say you have this Chinese New Year feasting, this gives you that flexibility and that option. So how we can apply calorie cycling? So basically, if the dotted line in red is basically for you, in order for you to be in a calorie deficit, that is your calorie target, which is 1,800. So in this case, we will get you to aim for Monday to Friday, go for a calorie amount of 1,500, which is an additional deficit from your expected 1,800, a 300 additional deficit. With this, it will give you an added buffer so that when you get to the weekends, you have additional calories that can be factored in. So in this case, if you add all of these 1,500 times 5, and if you even add 2,300 and 2,800, the net amount is still 12,600, which still allows you to be in a deficit because you take 1,800, that's your deficit amount, 1,800 daily, times 7, that's 12,600. So if some of you just know that weekends is a day that you don't have any form of self-restraint, this is a goal or option you can consider, calorie cycling. But just have to adjust your calories in the early days of the weekday to account for your weekend binges. So this is one way you can do calorie cycling. Another way you can do it is you can do a day calorie cycling. That means, let's say on Monday, you have a dinner, let's say a last minute dinner that's catered in. What you can do is your breakfast and lunch, you can reduce your normal calories. Let's say if I normally eat 400 calories for breakfast, maybe I'll just have a shake. That's about maybe 100 to 150 calories. That saves me that 250 calories. And maybe lunch, I normally take like 700 calories. I shave down 250 calories. Then when I take that 250 and 150, I have 400 additional calories, which can be added to my dinner as a buffer. So that's how you can apply this calorie cycling. So also with that said, some of us will prefer to look at some visuals to see some weight loss journey. So this is one of our clients' weight loss journey. So if you look at the bottom hand corner, there are certain dates. We are looking at because if you take from November all the way to February, if we take every day, it's gonna be very messy over at the bottom. So we just took like a 3-day weight average. So you see it's on the 10th of November, 13th of November, so on and so forth to 26th of February. And if you look at the vertical axis, this is the calorie amount, 0 all the way to 2,500 calories. And if you look on the right-hand column or vertical axis, this is the weight, 70 kg, all the way up to 80 kg. So basically, this is to show a client a weight loss journey. So the client started out with 2,200 calories, calorie goal rather. And you can see in that during that period, the client's weight stayed around 77 to about 76. It was pretty constant for them. So that during that period, the client is said to have been in a maintenance calorie. Hence, the weight didn't really budge here. There was not much changes or downward trend. And so we did an adjustment to his calorie intake. So somewhere around the 22nd of November, you can see that the calorie target dropped to about 1,800. And following that period, his weight slowly started to take a descent, go a downward trend. Obviously, it's not a nice flat curve going straight down this way, but it's more of an up and down. But if you compare from this position all the way down to about 14th of Feb, you can see it's a good downward trend, and it started from about 76, let's say 76.5 kg, and it's all the way down to about 72. Even better, probably one of those days went down to even 71, 70.7. So that just shows you when your weight is stalling, sometimes what you have to do is to reduce your deficit. So that is one of the main ways you can really lose your weight. And obviously, if you see from here, this is on the 14th of Feb. His goal has shifted from a weight loss or fat loss to a muscle gain phase. Hence, the calorie numbers, we brought it up. This is probably not the ideal calorie number. We are still doing some tweaks, but we just wanted to see how his weight trends over that. So right now, he's slowly hovering up to about 72. He was down at about 71 previously. So this is just a sample of a weight loss journey, and it's not a nice straight line going down. There's some movement up and down. There's some fluctuations. So that brings us to the next question. Does calories and carbs matter? So at the bottom, this is the same exact legend. It's a 3-day average for the weight. From the bottom here, if you can see, this one is the total carbs calories. So it's 800 calories from carbs and 0 calories from the bottom. Obviously, the weight is at the right-hand vertical axis. And for the blue line here, it shows the carbs calories for a 5 days moving average. The reason why we didn't use a daily one, because there is really too much fluctuations that is going on from there. So if we take a 5 days moving average, it shows a better representation. So what you can observe from this chart, if you notice this on this point here on the 19th of November, when basically when the carbs went up, you can see a spike in the weight as well. So there is a correlation here. If you were to look on the 7th of December, same thing, when the carbs went up, the weight went up. There is a huge correlation whenever your carbs, calories amount go up and with your weight. If you also were to look on the 9th of Jan, the same thing, you can see a spike here. And when there is a reduction here, there is a reduction in the weight as well. So there is a huge correlation to your carbs, calories consumed, and your weight. So with carbohydrate intake, it increases your glycogen content, and glycogen makes you store a lot more water. Think of it this way: when you have like 1 gram of glycogen, for example, you will store 3 times as much water. And there is a lot more fluctuations, especially for ladies also with hormonal changes here and there. So you want to keep that in mind. So carbs will play a role. But another point that we want to drive from here on is if you look at the overall trend, even though carbs cause these fluctuations up and down, over time, you can see that the weight is actually going downwards. This is linked to the previous graph where this client is in a calorie deficit. So sometimes when your weight stalls, you don't see any changes, give it a moment, give it some time because it most probably is water weight. But if you give it like a few weeks long, let's say more than 2 weeks, and you don't really see much changes, then you might want to adjust your calories to see that further change. But if you ask me, I'm for myself as well, my stomach isn't the flattest as well. But if I were to flex my abs, I can see them. It's just that I'm retaining a lot of water now because whenever I go to the Thai Fan lady, I will really add extra rice. It's just because I'm on a bulking phase. So I will really see that bloat on my stomach. But whenever I wake up in the morning, the stomachs get flatter. The stomach looks flatter definitely because the carbs has been reduced. Some other things that may be holding you back. Sometimes it's really lack of awareness of the caloric intake of food. So I did these measurements yesterday. So if you look at this picture on the left, 10 almonds is roughly about 10 grams. So 1 almond is about 1 gram. Just this measly amount is already 58 calories. And you can see the breakdown there, 2.1 gram of protein, 5 gram of fats, 2.1 gram of carbs. So mostly with nuts and all this, it gives you a lot of fats. And fats, there is a high caloric intake. So if you take 5 gram of fat times 9, that's 45 calories already. If I were to eat 100 gram or already 100 almonds, that would give me already 580 calories. So sometimes the thing with these peanuts and all these nuts and all that, it is healthy, but you just need to be mindful of the caloric or the energy intake or energy value of this food. Because sometimes you will take this for snacks, but you will just add up to your total calorie intake. And that's where instead of being in a deficit, you end up being in maintenance or even a surplus. If you look at peanuts, this is basically 10 gram of peanuts. And it doesn't even cover my whole palm size. There's still a lot more room to grow. And I know some of us may eat the whole bowl unknowingly and just, think it's, just a simple snack here. But yeah, that's where all your calories is. And this may be holding you back. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I will hand over the time next to Myron.
So funny, like Crystal.
All right. So guys, with regards to what I'm going to present, is really basically trying to answer what some of your questions are. We also have been, kind of like hearing a couple of things in the gym, and some of you, especially the new guys, when you guys join, you don't really know what we stand for, why do we exist, and stuff like that. So I'm gonna talk more about who we are, how this whole thing started. I'm of course going to talk about training systems. I'm going to explain like why you guys are doing certain phases and stuff like that. But just take note that I'm going to go through kind of briefly because to cover everything, like training phase-wise, is going to take 1 whole week, all right? So without further ado, I am going to move on. So how we first started out is really trying to find the truth about fitness. So 6 years-ish ago when higher performance, or back then it was core dynamics when it started out. Don't ask me why core dynamics. I do not know why the name was such, but so we started out because we wanted to find out the truth of fitness and what did it really take to achieve certain things like mobility, things like muscle gain, fat loss, strength, skills, and stuff like that. And so pretty much we started out exploring a lot, like overseas and stuff like that, about what exactly is the truth, what's the science behind what's needed. And 6 years on, for those that have been with us for 6 years, you can pretty much see that we have evolved our systems a lot, right? So again, what truth is defined is accordance to fact or reality. So do we know everything? I can say that we don't really know everything at the moment, but do we know enough to give you results? Yes, we do. So yeah, higher performance, our mission is really about finding the truth. Okay. If you look at our triangle of physicality, I heard of this question before not too long ago. Is higher performance all about just strength and strength and strength? It isn't. If you look at our triangle of physicality, we actually have three different kinds of, or three areas that we really want to focus on, with the psychological resiliency being number 4. And so we really want to work on high relative strength. What that means is how strong you are in accordance to what's your weight. And then number 2, your aerobic capacity, which includes your power endurance and your long duration runs and stuff like that. And last but not least, it's your mobility. So we want to be mobile enough, have enough endurance and anaerobic capacity to perform our runs and stuff, and again, be as strong as possible. All this can only be achieved with a good psychological resilience. So you have to be mentally tough. I'll talk a little bit more on that later on. The two important concepts that you want to take note of, it's really, at least for this lecture, it's about potentiation, because I'm going to talk about phase potentiation later. And number 2, it's about trainability. So potentiation is basically to increase the effectiveness of what the future outcome is basically your next phase of training. So whether you're in group class or custom class, if you look at the program, it may not make sense. It's like, for example, you want to gain muscle, you want to gain fat. Oh, sorry, you want to gain muscle, you want to gain strength or lose fat, right? But when you do a program, for example, if you do a fat loss program and you're doing something like an AMPK for those that are in custom class, and you're like, but I want fat loss, why am I doing so much of this muscle pump work? What you need to understand is we are trying to potentiate you better towards your goals. So in group class also, sometimes when we're trying to work towards the one-arm press strength or the pull-ups, the one-arm press strength or pull-up strength, and you're doing things like, nothing to do with pull-ups or stuff like that, just like what we did in our previous group class phase. But I mean, then, you hop into the next program. Within 2 weeks, some of you are already doing your PRs, like especially those in group class. If you look at your one-arm press strength and stuff like that, like Theo he just did his PR of never before, 44 kg one-arm press. Like Mel and Matilda, you guys are doing your 1RM for 9 sets of 3. It's all because we have potentiated to where we want to be and where we will be going. So this will be explained later on. And now next up, trainability. It's basically the ability to recover from and adapt to a given stimulus at a point in time. The given stimulus is your training stimulus. So basically, it's how much volume do you need to be able to elicit an adaptation. Only when you can adapt to your training, that's when the gains will come, right? You need to be able to adapt to your training stimulus. Now, how then do we increase your trainability? Basically, our philosophy is this: do the least that you need to, because when you do the least that you need to, for you to climb to the next, you only need a little bit. So for example, if I can achieve muscle gain with 5 sets of 10, why do I need to do 10 sets of 10? If your training program calls for 10 reps, why are you doing 15 reps? Because if you do 15 reps, you need to increase your number of repetitions the next time to 20 or something along that lines. So it's to increase your trainability, it's really about doing the least that's prescribed and then trying to increase your recoverability. And this is done through your lifestyle and your nutrition. So your nutrition is what fuels your cells, your ATP, and your lifestyle is really what happens from that training stimulus. So for example, if the training stimulus of a systemic or an AMPK training program is meant to increase your growth hormone, you need to be able to do so also through your lifestyle, such as getting enough and adequate sleep at a certain time and eating at the right time to increase that growth hormone stimulus. Okay. So in training, basically, there are only 3 main phases: the metabolic, the hypertrophy, and the neurological. Now, but what you can see, metabolic doesn't mean just fat loss. Metabolic can be done for fat loss, can be done for your conditioning as a whole, can be done for conditioning your cells, both your liver and your muscles, and it can be done for muscle gain. Hypertrophy can be used for fat loss. Now, the word hypertrophy is basically muscle gain. But with a hypertrophy program, we can use it for fat loss, muscle gain, as well as strength. And for the neurological phase, we can use it also for fat loss, for muscle gain, and for strength. For neurological phase is usually what we mean by high intensity, heavy lifting. So you can see that as much as there are only three main phases, what we can do with them is abundant. All right. So next week, actually March the 13th, we're going to talk more about hypertrophy and what leads to it and what detracts you from it. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to phase potentiation. So as you can see, there are many ways of fat loss, but to save time, I'm just going to talk about two different phases of fat loss. Why I need to talk about this is because during group class, a lot of you are like, hey, you're on AMPK as well. Oh, you're on AMPK as well. Why is everyone on AMPK? And I get like, some of you may think like, oh, you're just like anyhow prescribing AMPK or systemic work to you guys just because everyone's doing it and we're just giving you. But one thing I want you guys to understand is AMPK, it stands for adenosine monophosphate kinase. In short, I'll try to explain it in as simple as possible. Your rest time is extremely short. Actually, for group class, you guys have experienced this as well. For example, if we're going to do 8 sets of 8, and we're going to rest 20 to 30 seconds. The whole point of resting so short and it feels like crap in the last set is because we're trying to run your energy currency that's called your adenosine triphosphate or your ATP down to a monophosphate, which means from 3 molecules, we're going to decrease that to a 1 molecule. And by doing that, it requires a lot of energy to burn. And what all your body is craving for is just carbs and sugar. So AMPK, in short, it really helps. It does 4 things. Number 1, it helps to condition our muscle cells for further damage. Number 2, it helps us to create a bigger glycogen input, which means with a bigger glycogen input, think of it as we are increasing the reservoir for future training. So I can train intensely for longer durations in my next phase. Number 3, it helps to shuttle the carbohydrates into the right places without insulin. So this is extremely good for fat loss. And number 4, because we are burning so much sugar during the training phase, when you actually stop training, your body will be then utilizing fats as fuel to run your daily processes in life. A lot of you that have been consuming too much carbohydrates in your off season, what your body has actually does or is actually doing is now, even as you're just sitting down and not doing anything and running your daily activities in life, your body is relying on sugar for glycolysis and not fat. But AMPK does that. AMPK switches that whole thing altogether. Right? So as you, like what I said, AMPK has 4 reasons. So that's why AMPK will always be our bridge to everything else. Okay. So there's not just one way of fat loss. There are actually 3 to 4 ways. In fact, we are trying to come up with 6 different ways of fat loss. But what I want to show you on the computer right now is 2 different pathways for 2 different clients. So as much as some of you will end up in AMPK or systemic accumulation, this is the difference. So for example, for someone on fat loss path 1, the reason why they start on AMPK 1.0 is because we have found out that their previous diet has all been about carbohydrates, right? So which means what I said again, if all your previous diet has been about carbohydrates, all you think of burning is carbohydrates during training and after training. We are trying to shut that off when you are not training. That's why we start off with an AMPK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to hypertrophy 1.0. What Chris said about calorie cycling and carbohydrate cycling matters because which phase you're on, the macronutrients will change, your calories will change. So for example, when I'm going from AMPK to hypertrophy 1.0, I am going to drop the carbohydrates and increase the protein intake because hypertrophy 1.0 is going to damage the muscles, right? But I'm going to drop the carbohydrates because I don't need as much sugar as an AMPK program, but I want the calories to be the same because the volume from hypertrophy is going to bring me into a further deficit. And then from a hypertrophy 1.0, I go into a systemic accumulation 2.0. What that does is it burns more calories. So actually, but Systemic accumulation, I'm going to drop the calorie count because it doesn't burn as much calories as compared to hypertrophy because the volume is lesser per body part. All right. So this gives me, the systemic accumulation gives me a time to drop my calories a bit lower and my carbohydrates a bit lower. And then from a systemic accumulation 2.0, I'm going to go on to a 3.0. I am going to maintain all macronutrients because a 3.0 is much more intense. And then from there, I'm going to go on to a high threshold. A high threshold means a strength program. So like what I mentioned, it's one of the neural phases. At this time, like for example, Jita is on a high threshold. We are putting him on an extremely low carbohydrate diet as well as a low calorie diet, right? So each of this phase would have a different macronutrients, but each of these phase would have a different macronutrients to kind of fit the kind of training stimulus. So it isn't like, oh, I just do intermittent fasting or I just go on a low carb, high fat diet. If you are gonna go on a low carb, high fat diet and you do an AMPK 1.0, your body is going to be stressed out and you're probably gonna fall sick. All right. So you cannot say like, oh, I just low carb is the way to go. It really depends on what kind of phase you're in. Okay, I'm just again going to briefly describe what's a pathway number 2 for someone who's extremely deconditioned. Right? So for someone extremely deconditioned, we'll give them a systemic strength endurance circuit. This is something like 5 reps, right? That's a lot of rest because you will be surprised for someone who's doing a systemic work. After doing 1 set, they may even vomit, right? Because the body, the cells, and the liver, they are not used to such work, and your body cannot get rid of the lactate, and that's why we need to put them on something very basic. And then from there, we go into a systemic accumulation, which is a little bit more intense. And then once we know that the liver is conditioned from the systemic work, we will then put them onto an AMPK to now condition the body to try and burn the sugars. And from there, again, more intense program into accumulation 2. And then we will finish off with a hypertrophy 1.0. So as you can see, there are 2 very different pathways in fat loss. So even though you see a systemic or a AMPK, it is very different, right? So don't think that there is no thought process going to this. We will evaluate what you did before, where you're going after, and how fit you are, how's your calorie count, and all that stuff. Okay, I'm going to just very briefly talk about phase potentiation for hypertrophy. You don't have to know about this that much, but you can see the 2 pathways are very different. Someone's going to start on pathway number 1, which is systemic accumulation. As you can see, we are doing systemic accumulation, which is metabolic work for hypertrophy as well. And that is sort of like, for example, what Yvonne is doing. And then we can even do AMPK for hypertrophy. So it's not about fat loss only, right? So for someone who I know that I want to bring them into a high threshold 1.0 at the end, we start off with systemic accumulation because I know, for example, I'm going to give them extremely high volume at hypertrophy 3.0. And for that to happen, remember, it's all about trainability. And how to increase trainability is how fast you can recover to that training stimulus. And by doing a systemic accumulation at the start, when I go into a hypertrophy 3.0, my body is able to get rid of that lactate and all the metabolites such that I can recover faster from it. If I didn't do a systemic accumulation at the start, when I go into a 3.0, I'm going to take 7 days to recover. And what if the program calls for, let's say, legs every 4 days? How am I going to recover from that, right? So this is what we really mean by potentiation. One will lead to another, will lead to another. Okay. And then briefly talking about hypertrophy path 2. If I know that I want someone to end off with an oxidative phase, this is an example of, it can be like KIT, for example, someone very advanced. So oxidative phase is really about running the muscle deep into the ground. I don't think any of you have ever done this, maybe only one person, but when you do this, you will know that you're doing an oxidative phase because you'll be sore for 7 days straight, right? So I know that I'm going to have oxidative at the end, and I need to prepare the muscles for that. And that's why I'm starting with AMPK 2.0 because I'm trying to condition the muscle cells to get ready for what's to happen 4 phases down, right? So just briefly describing from AMPK, I'm going to go into a descending rep protocol. I'm going to build his strength. I'm going to use one of the hypertrophy stimulus. Don't worry, if you do not know what's that, we're going to talk about it the next time around. And then I'm going to give him a lot of volume at 3.0. After the volume, I'm going to start the damage by giving him a mechanical damage 2.0. So the damage phase has started, and I'm really going to give him the damage at the oxidative phase. So one thing will build to another. So everything is planned, and it's for a reason. So even though you see similar phases, do not worry. Okay. Now, I'm just going to talk about how then, this is more for like the customized program, right? So how our programs customize. I think it's important for you guys to know so that you don't think that we are cheating you of your feelings and your money and giving you cookie cutter programs. Okay, so later on, I'm going to give you an example of 3 people on 3 different systemic 2.0 work. But first, let's talk about, we do micro customizations within a training stimulus, right? So I'm going to just show you this is what I mean. There are 3 different people doing systemic work. Person A, you can see, is doing a dumbbell bench press and a kettlebell snatch. This is actually Yuli's program. And then person B is doing an incline dumbbell bench press and a concept 2 rower. This is Sophine's program. And then I've got someone doing a back squat and an incline dumbbell bench press. This is Zhen Yang's program. For person A, I'm getting her to both do a fat loss phase as well as preparing her for the tactical strength challenge. For person B, I'm getting her to do a fat loss phase, but because she has a knee injury, and that's why I'm giving her a concept 2 rowing. For person C, he is in a maximum strength phase, but I'm giving him systemic work because I want him to deload from neural phase. So you can see 3 people on systemic 2.0, but it is extremely different in terms of either exercises or what we are trying to achieve. Okay, so going to point number 2, your macros and your calories will differ. So someone on a hypertrophy 2.0, they use it for fat loss. The calories and the carbs will be much lower than someone who is on a hypertrophy 2.0 as well, on a hypertrophy phase, right? Because what I introduce for the calories would then change that trainability factor of what we're trying to achieve. Higher calories, your trainability will be higher because you're able to recover faster. But fat loss is not about recovery. Fat loss is about getting you into a deficit and really just trying to burn those extra calories. All right. And last but not least, we also customize within a systemic or whatever phase your specific strength, your skills, your mobility, and your injuries. So like what I mentioned just now, like again, Sophine has a knee injury, for example, and she's doing concept 2 rowing rather than back squats, right? Someone who has mobility goals, so for example, Chi Hui, as much as we may give him a systemic work, but actually you will notice that the tempo changes will give him maybe a 3 to 5 seconds pause at the bottom because we want him to have a loaded stretch. And for you guys that have achieved your back lever muscle ups and stuff, within a training program, we will still give you your specific strength program. So for example, like Alicia, giving you a muscle up work as well as a bit of a fat loss work, right? So yeah, customization within a customized program. Okay. Now, I briefly described, I just wanted to talk about this too a little bit, like what I explained about AMPK already. It will be a go-to program for our bridge between programs. That's why you see it so often. And systemic work, why you will see systemic work a lot as well is because it's usually a deload from our neural phase because it's at the end of a spectrum of a neural intensity program. It helps to improve your cardiovascular process as well as it detoxifies. It helps your liver with what we call mitochondrial biogenesis. What that means is basically just creating more mitochondria, which is your power plant within that cell. Right, so trying to condition your liver. Your liver governs everything in your body. So please take care of it. If you drink, try not to drink too much. Otherwise, you have a lot of difficulty with trying to recover, lose fat and stuff like that, right? So some of you behind the screen, just be careful of that. Okay. All right. I'm going to end off with some noteworthy mentions because this is what we have noticed over the months. First of all, this is your journey. So your goals and your successes are yours. It's not your friends in the gym or anything. If they want a fat loss, let them fat loss. If you don't want a fat loss and your goal wasn't fat loss in the first place, don't be distracted. If your goal was to build muscle or to look a certain way, well, don't let any of us or even your friends around you, whether in or outside the gym, say that, oh, why do you want to look like that? I know it's not nice, or why do you want to do this and stuff like that? Why, hey, I want to do on a fat loss program. Why don't you do it with me? Once you have created a goal, stick to it. All right, because this is your journey. Okay, and of course, be careful of social media, because ultimately just note that it is not what society wants. Right, it is about you. So do what you want, and don't be so concerned about how social media or society perceives you as one. There'll come a point in time where you will meet like disappointments because you have failed in achieving something, be it like say muscle ups, pull-up strength, certain deadlift number, or fat loss or muscle gain. You didn't manage to hit whatever number that we want you to hit or you set for yourself. But like what the second point is, failure is only failure when you think that you have failed. So you want to let the pain of it be a learning lesson to what you could have done it or what you didn't do. All right. So as coaches, when someone doesn't hit their target, we will look back at the drawing board as well, and we'll sit with you and try to understand what is it on our part that we may have let loose of, or maybe something that you could have done and you didn't do. All right. So again, you have only failed if you have allowed yourself to think that way. It should always be a learning lesson. Right. The third one I want to talk about is ask when in doubt, because a lot of you, I know, have questions about your program. And when you have questions about your diet, you have questions about your training, you do not know why you're doing certain things, you don't ask us. Instead, you just talk among yourselves. And when people come out with different theories and stuff, you get even more confused. One thing will lead to another. You have a snowball effect and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, everyone's just going to be frustrated, or then everyone's going to say, this doesn't work, or, I can't do this, I'm too old for this, my body's not made for that. Well, when you have any questions, really just ask us, because this is our full-time job. This is what we spend our life doing. Ask us the questions, okay, instead of speculating. Second last point is really, really interesting. Mentally tough, apply the 1% marginal gains rule. It's all about micro excellence. So this is not to be underestimated. This is what the British cycling team did. And they won, I think, about 18 gold medals because they applied the 1% marginal gain rule. So this 1% marginal gain rule is, so when you start out on, let's say, a fat loss program, right, you don't want to do everything that, like, for example, okay, immediately I'm going to go into low carbs. I'm going to sleep early. I'm going to train hard. I'm not going to meet my friends. I'm going to stop all my alcohol. It's not about how much you can do right now. It's about sustainability. So even if you think, okay, maybe I don't have enough protein in my diet, right? Start off with one thing that you can do. Maybe I'm just going to add one meal of protein, right? And some of the clients that did that, like, for example, Hazel, just adding protein, her fat had dropped, her strength gains just increased, Jita as well, from being a vegetarian, right? And now you're eating meat, your fat is starting to drop, right? So that's amazing. So it's always about, even if you improve 1%, even if you've lost 1% of your body fat, and you think it's not enough because someone beside you in your group lost 5%, so what? It's 1% lesser, right? So be happy about it. You're going to stress yourself so much. I mean, at the end of the day, this is just training. It's meant to make your life better. It's not meant to be, you're not meant to be so stressed out, and then you don't go to work, or you're so affected by work and your whole life suffers, right? This is meant to improve you and meant to elevate your life. So take things a little bit with a pinch of salt and aim for the 1% rule. Last but not least, trust the process. Don't doubt. If you ever doubt, again, feel free to ask us. We know where you will be going. And of course, just trust us. And if there are any questions, feel free to speak to your coaches. And yeah, that's all I have for you today. And I'll just see if the team has anything else.
Questions.
Oh, yes, there's any questions. Okay, so we mainly have 3 questions, but if any one of you have any other questions, feel free to ask us. Now, the first one is, what is the ideal mindset towards training and your program? I think we have briefly covered it. So the ideal mindset to your training is really just train according to the RPE that's given. Mindset-wise, I think Sophie did share, she has been talking and raving about this book about You Cannot Hurt Me or You Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, and he has really changed her mindset towards training. So if you ever find that, you have not so strong mind or weak mind, feel free to give that book a read. I think it's a really good read. And so I think that should be your mindset to everything in life, not just training. Go give that book a read. It's pretty good. The second one is Theo again, snatching 24 kg for 100 reps. Usually at the 3+ minutes, your back will fatigue. How should I then strengthen it, or what should I do for it? Theo, I think one of the things is basically trying to go, number one, progressive overload. So start off with volume work first, build up your lower back, because the lower back is a slow twitch fiber. So go for volume rather than intensity. And number two, give yourself accessory work like lower back extensions and stuff like that. And number three, try to change your snatch angle to let your hamstrings absorb more of the force rather than your lower back. Feel free to speak to us and we will show you that. Okay. And then the next question from Chloe, it's, I think some of you will have this question as well. If I miss one day of training, do I, number one, do day 3 of the following work and then continue my program, or can I just skip it and then go into program number 1, 2, and 3? This is a bit of a tricky question, and it's a good question because all this depends on what kind of a training stimulus you are having. For example, if you're doing a systemic work or an AMPK work, it doesn't matter if you actually miss the program, because systemic or AMPK work, it's meant to just, you see that some of the exercises are actually repeated. The reason for that is we're just trying to either flush as much glucose out of your muscle system as possible. So even if you miss it and you go into the next AMPK, it's still going to do the same thing. That being said, if you were to do a strength program or a hypertrophy program, and you need to finish up everything that you missed before you actually go into the next phase of program. Because if you didn't do the previous or the program that you missed, your volume will jump way too much, right? Instead of, for example, a 20% increment in volume, you suddenly will jump to like 30-ish%, right? So you want to finish up your volume for hypertrophy, or if you're in strength phase. So strength, for example, if I'm going to give you 3 sets, 5 sets, 9 sets, you don't want to skip it because you will jump into a heavier intensity before you even finish the volume that your body is supposed to do, right? So again, for fat loss, hypertrophy, fat loss for AMPK and systemic, it doesn't matter. Okay. Next question is additional good behaviors or habits outside the gym to aid in training. Well, it's all about recoverability, okay? So to increase your recoverability, sleep more. Try to sleep before 12 o'clock for the liver to repair itself. Again, if you're on a systemic AMPK kind of phase, try and sleep before 12 if you can. And most importantly, for Theo's question, again, mindset is extremely important. Always have a can-do attitude. Don't ever doubt yourself. Trust the process, trust us, and trust that you will be able to achieve it. And next question, Phoebe. If I exceed my calories for one day, will it help that I take much lesser calories the next few days and can still burn fat that it has presumably built on that one day? Well, since Chris presented on that, I'm going to get him to answer you.
Yes, so for example, if you exceed the calories by, let's say, 1,000, then you know that has added on like 1,000 calories to your maintenance or to your deficit goal. Then what you can do, you can either split it out, let's say, the day after, and 2 days after you reduce your calories, let's say the day after by 400, the next 2 days by 300 each. Then that will give you a net, we'll go back to your net goal of being in there to make up for that 1,000 calorie surplus that you had on that day. Yeah, but there'll be water fluctuations here and there, so you can adjust your calories as such and know that that weight gain that you had on that day, do not be so affected by it, because it's ultimately after that what's going to happen.
Okay, next question is, are BCAAs a must if we eat enough protein? Okay, first you need to understand, Jerry, that BCAA and EAAs are extremely different. EAAs is a full spectrum where Bcaa is only the 3 items, the isoleucine, the leucine, and the valine, right? Whereas EAA, it's the full spectrum. During training, you don't want to take EAAs, but outside of training, you do. Okay, I'm just going to briefly talk about this. I know it's a bit out of the context. You don't want EAAs or whey protein shake during your training, because what are you trying to do during training? You're trying to break down the muscles, aren't you? By taking EAAs or whey protein, for example, during your training, you are actually halting the process, because there are 2 kinds of enzymes that happens. All right, one is called the mTOR enzyme and one is called the AMPK enzyme. They are conflicting. When you're training, you want your AMPK to go up. When you're off training, you want your mTOR to go up. So by taking EAA or whey protein during your training, you are actually halting the whole process, right? If you do take enough whey protein, for example, you don't have, or I mean, you have enough protein in your diet, you don't have to take BCAAs or EAAs. What happens if you take too much protein? Well, it depends on how much, let's say if you're in a fat loss phase, right? I believe if you actually have too much protein, but you're still within your calories, it's still okay. I took up to 420 grams of protein when I was dieting to 4-5% body fat. Nothing happened to me, all right? So again, it all depends on your training stimulus. All right. And I'll count to 10 seconds. If there are no other questions, we will then conclude. 7, 6, 5,
No stress.
4, 3.
Oh wait, there's someone. Andrew. Okay.
Is there any other Is there any other readings you could point us to about the training phases? Yeah, we will try to find some and then we will point them to you. Okay. All right. If there are any other questions, feel free to text us, WhatsApp us if we didn't manage to answer them. Otherwise, thank you guys for coming on board, spending your time with us on the weekend. And the team will say bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye guys. I'll send you guys the recording. Bye.